Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi here with 9 News Director of Special Projects, Chris Vanderveen, for what's truly a special project behind us. This is MarshallFireMap.com, where, of course, coming up here on the 1-year anniversary of the Marshall Fire. Chris, tell us about this website that you worked so hard on.
Huge project. It really is. I have to give full credit to 9 News photojournalist Chris Hansen. It really sort of is the architect of this project. But it is a web-based project primarily that exists in this idea that we know that the Marshall Fire was the state's most destructive wildfire, but it was also its most documented wildfire. There were lots of people that were impacted by it. We lost 1,000 homes in all this, and lots of people that when they were evacuated, they got video of their evacuation. And what Chris did almost a year ago now, back in January and February of this year, was that he started gathering video, sort of creating a catalog, a library of all of these videos to sort of show us what it was like on the ground. And not just to show people the horror of it, but what we can learn from it and what happens when a small grass fire moves into a suburban area and starts to become what's called an urban firestorm. And that's really the key of this project, is that it happened nearly a year ago in that part of Boulder County. But there are other parts of the state that remain just as vulnerable as that part of Boulder County. And what struck people that were in this is that this was sort of, if you go back to December 30th of last year, this was sort of, it was a windy day, it was a warm day, a storm was approaching. You know the weather that goes on beyond it. But in front of that storm system, there was a lot of wind, hurricane force wind. And you had a small fire. We still don't have necessarily the specific cause of the Marshall Fire. But it started small, but because we had those incredible winds, it blew straight towards Superior and then Louisville. And people literally had 15 minutes going from, there's a puff of smoke off in the distance, to, I got to get out of my home. And what we're trying to show is the speed to which this moved, and then present it in an unorthodox fashion. We're primarily a TV station, but this is not primarily a television product. You're going to see some of this on 9 News, but the bulk of it is this website that you see behind me, MarshallFireMap.com.
And I think one of the big interactive features about this is a map here. I'm going to kind of scroll down here to it. And this is what you were saying about the kind of unorthodox, and I think in this case a good way, an unorthodox way to tell the story, right?
Yeah, so what you have now, and you go to this website, MarshallFireMap.com, and then you'll sort of see this map. And this is the orange area is the burn zone. And these little dots are GPS-centered locations of where videos were shot. So here's a time bar, and we do this in half-hour increments. It doesn't mean that all these were shot at 11 o'clock. These were just shot between 11 and 11:30, and then you go to sort of like, say, 1 o'clock. These dots represent videos that were shot between 1 and 1:30, and you click on, let's see if I can do this right. You see, click on one, and there's a video from Nick Kaplan that was shot at 1:14. And the backstory to this is that Chris gathered, we now have a catalog of roughly 650 videos. And not only did Chris sort of GPS coordinate, locate where all of these videos were shot down to the block, down to the street, down to the specific address, but he also got the timestamp on it to show you. So now at 1:14 p.m., we see what Nick Kaplan saw on that day. And I can raise that up. And then boom, that's what he saw at 1:14 from that specific location that you saw on the map. And I'm going to have you X out of that.
And so, okay, so we kind of go this is, I'm sure this is the intention. I think this tells the story interactively of how quickly this fire spread, because you go back to 11 o'clock, you see all these dots here at 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock, that's probably a video looking
back.
Looking back.
This is the origin of the fire, and this is where these dots are shot at this time. Let me get that out of the way. And this is, you see the beginning. This is 11:25, and you see the beginning of the fire. You're just seeing some smoke. You're seeing it. Now, again, we still don't know the specific cause of that fire. It's not been brought out, but we start to put together the pieces. And really what Chris talked about is the beginning, is that Boulder County Sheriff's Office, there's an active investigation into all of this. And so our open records requests, and what we do, we file open records requests with government agencies to get the things that they recorded, the documents that they have. But because there's an active investigation, Boulder County, which is the lead agency in this, said, no, we're not going to give you what we shot. But as we know, it wasn't just Boulder County that responded to this. There were dozens and dozens of outlying agencies that had to respond to a fire like this, and that's what you see. So again, you go back here. You go the Marshall Drive. This is why the Marshall Fire is called the Marshall Fire, and you click on that. This is Jack Palmer, who was one of the first persons to record the video. And you start to get a sense. There's wind. There's traffic. This was an area that eventually was fully burned, but at 11:24 on December 30th, this is you seeing what he saw. So let's go to that. Let's go to another one. Another Jack Palmer video. You start to see, again, just a little bit of smoke at 11:28. So you can really start to dive in to how this fire grew. And that's really sort of the benefit of this. And then, so let's go to just past to 11:30. So now you see the spread. There's more. This is Robert Gutierrez, who was driving a car on Marshall Drive and didn't know what he was driving into at the time. And so you get to see what he saw at that time. And so that's really sort of the benefit of this. And it's a really, I haven't seen, I will say, and I'm biased, I worked in the project, but I haven't seen a project quite like this, where you have a natural disaster unfolding in real time. And because so many people shot it, why not use their videos in the project to sort of help people understand? Again, this is obviously an incredibly difficult subject for a lot of people. A lot of people lost their homes in all of this. And I don't want to make light of that. This is going to be difficult. And maybe for a lot of people who live in the area, they're not going to want to watch this because it's too much, particularly where we're coming up on a year. But the lesson here, for not just the Marshall Fire Zone, but for all of this, I think is vitally important that we understand that a fire that started right here moved very, very quickly that day and started to burn into areas. So what's cool about this is that you see that's where the fire was, and then you start to see the heart of the fire really moving towards the west into Superior and Louisville.
Yeah, striking. I guess one question that comes off the top of my head with this in terms of just how detailed this is how long did it take Chris Hansen to compile all this information and to plot all these dots?
Months.
Months.
This was something that he would do on his off time, and just when he had a few hours a day, every day, is really sort of plot this in. And it's really extraordinary. Again, super biased. I lead the special projects team, what we call our originals team here at 9 News, and that this is the benefit of time. It's very unusual, particularly in this day and age, for journalists to get this amount of time to work on something. And so we wanted to come up with something that was unusual, insightful, and hopefully that's what we've come up with this project.
So you mentioned for those that might be obviously a little bit scarred by what happened here, that maybe the map and reliving the exact moments and details of this might not be the most flattering thing. There's other parts of this website as well, right, including the rebuilding component.
Yeah, so let's go down, because it's like, and there's lots of pictures that were shot by other video, and so I'm going to scroll down and show you the rest. This is a very, very large website. This right here is a documentary. It's a 21-minute documentary that Chris and I produced, really, that's based upon, conducted 15 interviews with people who saw this directly and used their video to sort of create a more linear timeline of what was happening at that time. And you get to see what they saw through their own words. This is a documentary that I don't necessarily mind my voice, but my voice is not on it. These are just told through the words of people who lived it. And again, you get to see what they saw and then pinpointing the location of where all these videos were shot. So if we go further down, more narrative, more pictures, and you start to get into the people that we interviewed for this project. Marcelo Renero, who's an officer with Louisville Police, Ann Cope, who's a researcher in South Carolina, Mike Masinko, who owned a house that was burned in all of this. So you start to get a sense that more video that was shot by body cameras. like I said, this is just a huge, huge project. This is interesting here. This is a model that was shown, and it's hard to sort of see in this area. Let me increase this. This is a wind pattern that was created by a researcher at NCAR. Here's the Marshall Fire down here. Here's a fire that started that same day. Had it not been put out around here, because of that wind, this shows you where that fire would have gone. It would have burned into northern Longmont. This fire would have been worse, significantly worse than the Marshall Fire. So again, it gives you an idea of what we're talking. If you could X out of that.
Yeah. And so, sorry. So just to kind of clarify here. So this is a model showing
what could have happened had firefighters not. But this is in northern Boulder County. This is the Marshall Fire right here. That's the burning area and shows what it's burning. You get a sense. It's hard to see maybe from that camera, but you get a sense that's the extent of the Marshall Fire. We all know how much damage that did. This fire would have burned had they not stopped it in time past I-25. If you're familiar with that section of Boulder County, that's a lot of miles between that section of Boulder County and then burning over I-25, but that's very much what could have happened at that moment. This is a gallery of all the people that we interviewed. You can press on any one of them.
wow.
Makia Minich, who was one of the persons that saw it, and you can sort of, again, hear his words. It's really important, we felt, that you hear directly from the people impacted. Less from us, more from them. And they can tell you what they experienced, because this was obviously a traumatic experience, but it was also something that lots of people in this area didn't think that they would have to prepare for. We're used to forest fires in this state, but when you live in a place like Superior or Louisville, you're not necessarily prepped that a grass fire could do this kind of damage. And I think for me, it's a bit of a game changer for the state because of this. And all these people, everybody we talked to, nobody said, oh, I could have seen this coming. Nobody saw this coming until it was too late.
And I guess a question for you, Chris, here is anything, I'm sure you learned a lot during the course of putting this together. Was there any one thing that stood out to you that you learned during putting Marshall Fire map?
I asked Chris that for a story that's going to run on Next tonight. Which is the December 14th, if you're watching it. I asked him that, like, what did you learn? And so Chris was, see if I can, let me go back to the map. It's going to take me, sorry. I still need to get better at working this thing. So Chris was covering the fire from right around this area. And so he was right around here when the fire, and a lot of people may have seen Kyle Clark the night of the Marshall Fire, and there was a huge dramatic fire behind him. He was shooting it right around here. And Chris said so when you're watching the fire from one perspective, you don't know how to get an idea of what's going on. But you also sort of think that the Marshall Fire was just one large fire. But what he found out is the Marshall Fire instead was a series of smaller fires as it burns into neighborhoods and then takes on a characteristic all its own. And that's what they call sort of an urban firestorm, is when the fire starts here in that part of Boulder County and starts to go in this direction, and you can sort of see the branches of where the fire went. What happens is that here it's sort of moving in a fairly predictable pace because there's a lot of grass around here, and it's moving as the wind carries it. But once it gets into a place like Superior, and lots of homes, and these are all homes that were lots of damage in this area, you start to understand that it hopscotches. And so there may be homes in here that survived. There may be areas that seem like they're untouched. And that's what was happening, is that the fire would catch the roof on fire, it would catch a fence on fire, and it would start to hopscotch. And what was also found is that this was very much what's called an ember fire, is that huge embers. Let's say a house burns here. And huge embers from that fire then will carry from the wind. Because remember, the wind was, in some cases, close to 100 miles an hour. It starts blowing the wind over here. So you could have a fire that's pinpointed right here, let's say on Mohawk Circle. And then all of a sudden, it jumps
80-mile-an-hour gusts, and it's jumping.
And then all of a sudden, you've got a home over here that's burning. And so what he learned, long answer to your question, but what he learned is that this fire was a series of smaller fires that kept going for hours and hours and hours, and only until the wind really started to die down as night came, excuse me, on December 30th, did really firefighters start to gain a bit of an upper hand on this. But as you know, throughout the day, there's not much you can do to fight a fire when winds are going 70 to 100 miles an hour.
Any final takeaways, features about the website that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, let me show you.
The rebuild side.
In the rebuild section. So what our staff has also done, this is the series of stories by Nelson Garcia and Tom Cole, is that we've profiled 3 families for a year in terms of what's happened to them over the course of a year and what it's meant for them for all of it. So you can click on these and watch the stories that sort of Katie Eastman has produced. And you can learn more about the individual struggles of families. These are 3 stories. There's 1,000 stories like this. And I think it's important that sort of people realize that, we decided early on that we wanted to see this process through. This has been a difficult process for so many families, sort of like their house gone, having to move and set up residence. And then these are people that are still, they're not back in their homes yet. Their life is still, a year later, is not back to normal. And it may very well never be back to normal. But we wanted to show you what that process has been like for 3 individual families. So that's here. There's also a series of investigations that Steve Steger and Sam Burgum led, that are employees that Sam's a producer here at 9 News and Steve's a reporter, about the evacuation and what that meant. This is sort of a rendering of how people are warned in the event of a fire or some sort of natural disaster. So there's a lot to explore, and I would urge people, if you have a moment or few moments, this is a website you can go to, and there's a lot of stuff on it, and you can really get a better sense of what this fire was like. Again, not from a voyeuristic standpoint, but from a what can we learn standpoint.
So it's not just reliving, it's looking ahead, telling some of those important stories. And again, just for everybody out there, this is MarshallFireMap.com. This is a collective project between several of our reporters, producers, and also this was developed by Fruition as well. A big initiative, Chris.
Yeah, this is not, I've been here 20 years, never been involved in a project like this. This is a huge, massive effort that took months and months of work to get to. And again, I just hope people sort of get the opportunity to give it a look, let us know what you think. There's a way to contact us through it. Just let us know what you think.
Would that be up here?
Share. There's also through there as well.
Yeah, okay. Well,
now you're going to mess it all up.
Yeah, now I'm going to mess it all up. But it is MarshallFireMap.com. Chris, I know a big project of yours, something you and many of us here at 9 News have been working on for months, so we really appreciate your time and sharing about this with us as well.
Thanks, Chris.